Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to wyomingpbs.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
Senator Mike Enzi's political career spans decades, and it all began when Senator Al Simpson, while encouraging him to run for office, told the then 30-year-old Enzi to put his money where his mouth is. And that is just what Enzi did. First serving as Gillette's mayor, then in the Wyoming Legislature, and finally as a 4-term United States Senator, where he passed over 100 bills. Senator Mike Enzi, at home in Gillette. Next, on Wyoming Chronicle.
This program was funded in part by a grant from Newman's Own Foundation, working to nourish the common good by donating all profits from Newman's Own food and beverage products to charitable organizations that seek to make the world a better place. More information is available at newmansownfoundation.org. Funding for this program is made possible in part by the Wyoming Humanities Council, helping Wyoming take a closer look at life through the humanities, thinkwy.org, and by the members of the Wyoming PBS Foundation. Thank you for your support.
And as we begin this special Wyoming Chronicle, it's my honor to be joined by Senator Mike Enzi. Senator, thank you for taking the time to visit with us today.
Well, I'm looking forward to the interview.
So are we. And we're in your office here in Gillette. I think the most appropriate question to begin with is, how's retirement?
It's absolutely delightful. I didn't realize the amount of strain that a person's under when they're serving. Just the trip back and forth from Washington to Wyoming, plus the 500 miles a weekend around Wyoming, is more of a strain than I realized. It's very nice to have the extra time and not have to travel and to be around Wyoming people all the time.
Well, we're certainly glad that you're here too, and congratulations on such a wonderful life of service, almost 50 years, Senator. It seems like a long time.
Yeah, I always think of it in segments rather than as a whole. But it's much easier that way. It's been a delightful adventure. I've gotten to meet so many tremendous people. I've gotten a fantastic education. Everything that I've ever worked on has been an education for me because I really didn't know as much as I should have to be able to handle the situation. But I've also been lucky in that I've had some good people to work with. I've never had anybody work for me. I've only had them work with me, and I was able to find tremendous groups of people to help me out through all of the different things that I've done, whether it was being mayor, being in the legislature, or now in the United States Senate. But of course, the biggest help that I had was having somebody say yes to my request to marry. And she has been with me now for over 51 years. Almost 52 years, and just been a tremendous helpmate, and actually does the bulk of the work, and I get the bulk of the credit.
And you're talking, of course, about your wife, Diana.
Yes, Diana. Innovative in her own right and done a number of spectacular things, helping out in other countries to remove landmines and showing people how homeless shelters can work better. And just a whole variety of things that she's worked with, as she's even adopted another community in D.C. that have nothing to do with Congress that she's been helping out with and getting to know and learning from.
I want to start by visiting about what Senator McConnell said about you as he was saying goodbye in the Senate. He said this. He said, "The senior senator from Wyoming has accomplished enough in one career to fill two. He has seemingly glided from business success to military service to local government to state politics to the United States Senate, where he has built a remarkable, productive legislative record." Senator, you passed over 100 bills. That in today's world, that seems almost incomprehensible. It really does.
Well, it is, because things have changed so much. We used to be able to work across the aisle a lot more, and we did bills a step at a time. Now everything has to be comprehensive. If you tackle a problem, you've got to cover the the whole thing, and so it's like 3,000 pages in the bill. Who can read 3,000 pages comfortably? And if you do find some things, and you always find some things you'd like to correct, you can't correct them because the process is so cumbersome on doing it on the floor that it can't be done. So you either have to accept it or not. And most of the things don't get accepted. But if you bite it off a step at a time, you can actually scrutinize it. You can draw in other people and get ideas. You can grow those ideas so that they will work. And you can eliminate some things that are going to cause a problem. That's my 80% rule or 80%
And I
tool.
want to talk about that because you talk about that in the context of it's not really compromise, it's common ground as I understand it.
Absolutely. Yeah, compromise is where you give up half of what you believe in and I give up half of what I believe in, and we wind up with something that nobody believes in. But as you're going through issues, you'll find that you can agree with 80% of the issues with the other person. And if you pick out any one of those issues, you'll be able to agree on 80% of that issue. Not the whole thing, because there's 10% on both sides that have been colliding for years. I got to work particularly with Senator Kennedy on a lot of those issues that had been butting heads for years. And what we did was figure out that you can take that piece out. It doesn't destroy the bill. It just doesn't do as much as what people might like to do in that one step. But it gets the rest of it done. We'd worked on mental health parity. He had worked on mental health parity with Senator Domenici for 14 years and hadn't been able to get it through. And because of some other successes that I'd had with him, he came to me and said, would you take a look at this bill and see if there's something we can do to it? And I showed him the parts that were killing it each time. Now, the interesting thing is those parts that were killing it were considered by the mental health community to be the most important pieces of the bill. So we got the whole mental health community together, and I said, so how long have you been working on this? They said, well, 14 years. I said, how much have you gotten done? They said, well, none of it. So Senator Kennedy and I explained the different parts that we were going to be getting done and the piece we were going to be leaving out. We said, wouldn't you like to get all of this done and just leave this out? And the light bulb came on. And instead of pushing against it on the floor, they started helping us. And it went over the cliff, and we got mental health parity.
Senator, some people today would look at what you've just talked about with working with Senator Kennedy, a Democrat. And how could you ever do that from conservative Wyoming? Yet you have a spirit of bipartisan support in your career that is almost unmatched. What would you say to those folks?
Well, what you try to do is find the common ground. And you can do that with anybody if people will remain civil while they're doing it. You can't be calling the other person names and expect them to cooperate with you. You cannot stand toe-to-toe. I have some people that say, you know, if you just stood toe-to-toe with them and yelled a little bit louder, you would get that done. I'd say, you know, I have tried that. And I always wind up having to apologize. And when you apologize, it puts you behind in the negotiations. So it's much better to find out where the common ground is and try and work out some kinks. And sometimes you can get from the 80% up to 90%. Actually, you can get to 100%. The trick is to find a whole new way of doing that other 10%. I've sent people off before that had a bill and said, you know, get together with them and find some other way to do that. And we'll be able to do it. And they come back and they say, we found it, we found it. And everybody on that little task force says, it was my idea. And you know when they say it was my idea, they are passing it.
That's right.
And that's the way to get them done.
I read this, and I want you to tell me if it's accurate. It was written in Politico. Someone said that Enzi is among the least flashy personalities in the Capitol. He often literally keeps his head down, immersed in either thought or reading, typically wielding an e-reader device. Is that you when you were in Washington?
Well, I primarily kind of avoided the media because you can't negotiate a bill through the media. You have to negotiate it with the other negotiators. And if you negotiate something by putting your idea out as being the prime thing in the media, you're stuck with it. If somebody else wants to revise it, then everybody gets into this controversy of, how come you were so wrong? Well, I wasn't wrong, it just needed to be done differently. So I just never found any real advantage, and I was working on so many things I didn't have time to go seek out the media to see if I could get their approval or not. Coy Knoebel was my communications person for years, and he agreed that the best publicity you can get is earned publicity. When you do something, then you can tell people about it. If you're just working on it, that's no big deal. Everybody's working on something.
Coy was the first person you hired when you decided to run for the Senate.
He was. When I was just starting my campaign, I had no idea how to do a statewide campaign. I knew that they probably needed some kind of a person for press, and Bob Peck was one of the people that talked me into running. So I went to him and said, do you have any press person that what should I do? And he told me about this young kid that was really good that he thought I could get. I interviewed him. Coy called back later and said, no, I don't think I can do the job. I called Bob Peck. Bob Peck talked to him. He called me back and said, okay, Bob says this is what I ought to be doing. And he worked for me the rest of the time through the Senate, and has been just a tremendous help, and was great on press, and then became communications, and then actually became my chief of staff.
And you ran that first campaign with 3.5 people. How did you manage that? What was it like going out to do a statewide campaign for the first time?
It really helps not to know what you're doing.
You say that with some seriousness. I
do. And not having enough money to have the professionals who can tell you how you can start some controversy so that you can get press, because that forces the other people to spend more money, which forces you to spend more money, and it just goes back and forth that way. The best thing is listening to people. We did a lot of door-to-door and invited people to ice cream socials in the park. We didn't go and say, would you vote for me? We said, we're having this little get-together where you can come and have some ice cream and soda pop in the park at 5 o'clock. Incidentally, 5 o'clock is the best time to do it. People are on their way home. Mm-hmm. If they get home, they have dinner. They're not coming back out for something political. But they will come and visit with you at 5 o'clock. And we just did a lot of the door-to-door that way. And it compensated for not having a lot of money, because people like to be able to tell you what they're thinking. I didn't do town halls. I did listening sessions. At a listening session, I had somebody prominent from the town do the introduction and set up the rules. And I just sat at a table and took notes, and we had a microphone, and they could get in the line and come up the microphone and tell me what they were thinking. They could ask questions too, but I wasn't necessarily answering their questions. I didn't answer any questions at that time. I wrote down things and circled some that I thought were great ideas, and then at the end I got the last 15 minutes to do some answering of questions and to point out the great ideas that I had heard at that. People in Wyoming are phenomenal at ideas. Of course, most of them are working that idea every day on their job. Mm-hmm. And they're thinking about it all the time that they're on their job. And they come up with these great ideas. Now, when I first started hauling these ideas to Washington, people would say, too simple, never work. I'd say, no, it's just good common sense. Well, common sense doesn't go very far back there. But as time went by, they said, well, is this another one of those things that somebody that's working on the ground out there in Wyoming came up with? I'd say, yes. And they said, okay, we'll do it.
You've talked about not liking committee meetings, but enjoying roundtables in your legislative career. What's the difference, and why was that important to you?
Well, at a committee meeting, the majority party picks all of the people that are going to testify, except for a small portion, usually one, and the other side picks that one. And then everybody comes and beats up on the witnesses. And the purpose of a hearing shouldn't be to beat up on anybody, not to make political speeches. It should be to find out what the ideas are for that. At a round table, what we did, Senator Kennedy and I actually experimented in this early on, is we'd agree on who ought to be invited because they had done something in that area. And we would give them a set number of questions that we wanted them to answer. And then they would tell what they did, why they did it, how they did it, and what they would do if they were going to do it over again. And then the panelists would discuss, because they'd all have similar things that they'd done, and they'd make some suggestions for how maybe what that guy said might work a little bit better, or wonder if it would. And I remember after the first hearing we had, Senator Kennedy came to me and he said, you know, it's really interesting to learn something about what we're doing before we write the bill.
Novel
and so we did
concept,
roundtables after
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
It's just a novel approach.
Take us back in your history, Senator. You grew up in Thermopolis and then moved to Sheridan.
Mm-hmm.
So was your first job selling worms, Senator?
I don't think it was my first job, because I think I was already mowing lawns and things. But yes, I raised worms. I captured night crawlers and sold them. And it came into play later when I was in the legislature, because Eli Bebout had the same kind of a background. And so on one of the bills that we were discussing, we went into what our background was on money and how it applied to the bill. It was a lot of fun. But I learned a lot from everything that I've done. Sometimes we do things and we don't realize how much we're learning from it.
But you loved fishing even at an early age.
Yes, I did. I had a grandpa that took me fishing, and he had a little heart problem, so he had to have somebody with him, and so I got sprung a lot to go with him. And he taught me a lot, and we went through the transition from the old casting rods to the spinning rods to the fly rods.
And you even tie your own flies today.
I do. A guy named Sam Mavrakis helped to teach me how to tie flies. He's a famous person in Sheridan, and I invented a fly in 4th grade. I was trying to tie a ginger quill. It looks nothing like a ginger quill, but it caught fish. And there was a point when the only flies I ever carried with me was this NZ special. It's capital N, capital Z special. And it pretty much will always catch fish. But it doesn't look good. So it'll never be in a magazine. Nobody's going to really try to duplicate this thing, because they like art in their
I
flies.
don't know if it works.
The fish like ones that look like they might have been chewed on a little.
You were in the Jaycees.
Yes.
Why did you join the Jaycees when you were younger?
Well, when we first got to Gillette, Diane and I were the only people working in the store. And actually, we had to build a store because it was a boom time.
And this was a shoe store.
A shoe store, yeah. The town got big enough for a shoe store. We had just gotten married. So week after we got married, we came to Gillette and started building a shoe store. And we did the carpentry work on it with Diana holding up big walls and got it into operation. But after a while, Diana said, you know, the only person that I get to talk to is you, and the only person you get to talk to is me. We ought to have some friends. Well, we tried to figure out how in a community we'd make any friends. And Diana had been in the Junior Miss Pageant in Sheridan and knew about the Jaycees from that. So I checked into the Jaycees, which was a young men's leadership organization. It had a comparable women's group called the Jayceettes. But you couldn't be a Jayceette unless your husband was in Jaycees. So I joined Jaycees so that she could have some other friends, some other people to talk to. And I got involved in that and wound up being the local president, kind of by accident. And but the chapter did real well that year, and then I got a state appointment, and then I ran for the state presidency because I didn't think anybody was really suggesting anything they ought to do. They just wanted the position. And so we ran for that and did ice cream socials with it, and didn't have any business probably doing it, but got it anyway. And then I went all over the state talking about leadership.
Including making a speech in Cody.
Yes.
That a certain senator heard.
State convention was in Cody, and our keynote speaker was Senator Simpson. And he did his normal, really spectacular, humorous job of speaking. I talked a little bit about leadership, and afterwards, he took me by the elbow and led me off in the corner of the room. And he said, I don't know what party you're in, but that town you're in needs a mayor, and it's time you put your money where your mouth is on this leadership stuff. So coming back from Cody, Diana was driving. She does a lot of the driving for us. I said, you know, maybe I ought to run for mayor. And she drove down into the borrow pit and back up. I could show you the spot. And then we talked about what our community needed for the next 3 hours getting back to Gillette.
Because Gillette was not booming yet, correct? It was on the cusp of
Oh,
becoming a boom
it
town?
was already having a little bit of an oil boom, and
Okay.
it had a power plant.
And you're
being
30
built,
years
and-
old at the time. Is that
I was
right?
29 then.
Okay.
But yeah.
Almost.
And but we could see what was coming, and we could hear a lot of complaints about what was coming too. But so we talked about what the community was going to need if all of these things happened, and I ran on that. I'm probably the only person that's ever been elected to office in Wyoming that ran on a planning platform. Actually, though, what I had on my brochure was that I was going to have an agenda at the council meetings and a balanced budget.
Sounds pretty simple, Senator.
Well, Jaycees taught you about having agendas so that you could get through meetings efficiently. And the state already had a requirement that you had to have a balanced budget. So, but I wanted the community to be a place that people would like for their kids to grow up. And evidently the people liked that idea, and I got elected, and then I found out what kind of a job I'd gotten into, because we didn't have any water. We didn't have any snow removal equipment. We had a bad winter that year. We needed sewer and water and sidewalks and everything you could do. In fact, I got a call from the person that provided electricity to the city of Gillette, who owned their own electrical system, and said, "What are you going to do when your only substation blows up?" And I said, "What's a substation?" And he explained it was a giant transformer, and when the heat of fall came, that thing was going to blow up. I said, "And so what would the result of that be?" He said, "Well, the people would be without power for about 6 weeks."
Wow.
I pictured myself being tarred and feathered when that happened, and started immediately to buy a substation, which was not in the budget, and that would have made that illegal, but I came up with a financial technique that we were able to use that did that. But then I had to go out and get easements too. That was a whole nother experience for me, buying easements. And I had one that I couldn't get, so we had to go to court on that to condemn. And as part of the process, the engineer for the substation said, "So why do you need this easement?" He said, "Well, if we don't get the easement, we can't connect up the substation, and the whole power system will go out." And at that moment, the electricity went off in the courthouse. And the other attorney started yelling about theatrics, and the judge closed his book, and I ran over to the window and looked down where my substation was, and there's this puff of smoke going up.
True story?
True story.
Oh, my
True
goodness.
story. But it was not the substation that blew up. What had happened is that something had happened over in Buffalo, and it affected our electrical system and blew a fuse.
Okay.
And the fuse caught on fire and was going up. So we got our substation. There's just a number of things. Water. We were already on water rationing, and our water was color coded. The hot water, the cold water came out kind of red from the iron in the water. The hot water came out black from the coal evidently in the water. Nobody drank the water. People had a lot of medical problems from that, so we knew we needed more water, and needed more water storage, everything. So I was able to do that over the course of the time that I was as mayor.
And for someone who didn't want to be in politics to start with, one might think that would have been plenty, but on you go to state office.
Well, I learned a lot of
House.
things as mayor, and there were a lot of things that I thought ought to be done differently for municipalities. And I ran and got on the corporations committee, because that's who handles all these municipal things. And one of the things I learned quickly was that they considered me biased since I'd been a mayor. So after 2 years on that committee and not a lot of success, I said, "Put me on something else." Well, they put me on education. And since I'd never even served on a school board, I'd never done anything, I wasn't a teacher, I'd never done anything except go to school. So I was an expert in that committee and got a lot done. It was a better experience for me. But I learned a lot about education, which helped me when I got to the U.S. Senate.
Sure.
Because I got on the committee with health, education, labor, and pensions. But I'd done some safety work in the oil field, and so there were some things I wanted to clear up at the federal level that I thought I could do when I got there. So that's why one of the reasons I picked that committee. It also had more turnover because, like, I got on that committee down at the legislature, And they said, "Why are you getting on that committee? We just give that to the people that don't have anything." No, I want to get some things done here. And so I got on the health committee and the safety committee down there and got a bunch of things done. So,
What do you miss about Washington, or what do you think you will miss about Washington?
I'll miss the people, and that's about it. I got to serve with some tremendous people, and I got to work with some tremendous people that were on my staff and on other people's staffs. And I hope that I can see some of them again, most of them again, any of them that want. We've invited a lot of people to come to Wyoming, and we'd give them a tour. I don't know if anybody will take us up on it, but I'll miss the people.
Well, Senator, we appreciate your service to our great state. Full disclosure, your wife now is a member of the Wyoming PBS Foundation Board, and we appreciate her as well.
Yeah, well, she's been the essential part of my life and has handled all kinds of problems that I never had to worry about, and she handled them more efficiently than I would have. And I'm just so pleased that I got to have this adventure, that the Wyoming people trusted me to be their United States Senator and act on their behalf, and the same for the city of Gillette and the people in the state that let me learn all of those things. People need to have adventures, get outside their comfort zone, and I certainly have. And it's been a privilege and an honor, and just so many wonderful memories.
We certainly wish you the best.
Thanks.
You bet. Thanks for joining us on Wyoming Chronicle.
Thank you.
This program was funded in part by a grant from Newman's Own Foundation, working to nourish the common good by donating all profits from Newman's own food and beverage products to charitable organizations that seek to make the world a better place. More information is available at newmansownfoundation.org.